The Janitor's Secret. When a billionaire's empire crumbles in one night, only a humble maintenance man stands between her and destruction. But this isn't just any janitor, and tonight 50 armed men will learn why you should never corner a sleeping lion. The Imperial Hotel's grand ballroom shimmered like a golden cage, its crystal chandeliers casting dancing shadows across faces worth billions. Tonight was supposed to be Kate Morell's triumph, the announcement of her tech company's revolutionary breakthrough that would change the world. Instead, she stood at the center of a feeding frenzy, surrounded by vultures in $1,000 suits. Ms. Morell, Kyle Brennan's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade through silk. He stepped forward, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the cold calculation of a predator who had tasted blood. I think it's time we discussed your situation. Kate's fingers tightened around her champagne glass, the crystal warming under her grip. At 32, she had built Novatech from nothing. A girl from Detroit who had clawed her way to the top of Silicon Valley through pure genius and relentless determination. But tonight, surrounded by the very investors who had once begged to fund her vision, she felt more alone than ever. "There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Brennan," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Novatech's financials are solid, our patents are secure, and our upcoming launch will what?" Brennan's laugh was like breaking glass. "Save a company that's hemorrhaging money. Face the facts, Kate. Your little empire is built on sand, and the tide is coming in." The circle of investors tightened around her, their faces a mixture of greed and false sympathy. These weren't just business rivals, they were sharks who had been circling for months waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Kate had refused Brendan's hostile takeover attempt 3 times, and now he was here to collect his due. "The patent disputes alone will bankrupt you within 6 months, continued Victoria Sterling Brennan's cold-eyed lieutenant. "Your lead engineer sold your secrets to our subsidiary in Taiwan. Your board of directors, they've already agreed to our terms." Kate's world tilted. "That's impossible. David would never betray you." Brennan produced a tablet swiping to a video of David Chen, her closest friend and head of development, signing documents in what looked like a hotel room. "Everyone has a price, darling. His happened to be his daughter's college fund and his mother's medical bills." The betrayal hit harder than any physical blow. David had been with her from the beginning, working 18-hour days in her garage when Novatech was just a dream. They had celebrated every victory together, weathered every storm. To see him, her friend, her brother in all but blood reduced to signatures on betrayal documents, felt like watching her heart being torn from her chest. "You bastard," Kate whispered, but her voice carried across the suddenly silent ballroom. "You destroyed his family to get to me. I gave him an opportunity." Brennan shrugged, his indifference more chilling than any threat. "Just like I'm giving you one now. Sign over your controlling interest and I'll let you keep a small percentage. Refuse and tomorrow morning Novatech will be worth less than the paper your contracts are printed on." The other investors nodded like vultures, bobbing their heads over carry-on. These were men and women who had built empires on the ruins of others' dreams, and Kate could see in their eyes that they had already written her obituary. "Think about your employees, Kate," added Marcus Webb, a silver-haired financier whose smile never reached his eyes. 500 people who depend on you. Are you really going to let your pride destroy their livelihoods?" Kate's mind raced. She knew they were right about the financial pressure. The patent lawsuits had drained her reserves, and the recent cyber attacks on their servers had set back the product launch by months. But she also knew that signing over Novatech to Brennan would be like handing a loaded gun to a madman. His company, Meridian Industries, was notorious for acquiring innovative firms only to strip them for parts and sell the pieces to the highest bidder. "I need time to consider." "Time is a luxury you don't have." Brennan interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The offer expires at midnight. That gives you—" He glanced at his Rolex, a gesture so theatrical it was almost insulting. "Exactly 47 minutes to decide whether you want to walk away with something or lose everything." The ballroom seemed to shrink around her. Kate could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes, investors, journalists, competitors, all waiting to witness her downfall. The golden cage was closing and she was running out of air. "And if I refuse," she asked, though she already knew the answer. Then tomorrow, every major news outlet will receive detailed reports about Novatech's financial irregularities, your alleged embezzlement of research funds, and your inappropriate relationship with several board members. Brennan's smile was a knife wrapped in silk. You'll be unemployable within a week, and personally liable for millions in damages. Kate felt the floor shifting beneath her feet. The accusations were lies, but in the court of public opinion, truth was a luxury few could afford. By the time she cleared her name, Novatech would be a memory, and Brennan would have moved on to his next victim. You can't just, I can do whatever I want, Brennan said, stepping closer until she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something darker, the scent of cruelty. I own judges, senators, and journalists. I have enough dirt on half the people in this room to bury them all. You're brilliant, Kate, I'll give you that. But brilliance without power is just a pretty dream. The circle of investors pressed closer, their faces blurring together into a nightmare of greed and false concern. Kate's chest tightened, and for a moment she wondered if this was how her father had felt in his final days, cornered, abandoned, watching everything he had built crumble, while vultures picked at the pieces. 35 minutes. Brennan announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom like a death knell. I suggest you use them wisely. As the investors dispersed, leaving Kate standing alone in the center of the vast room, she caught sight of her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The successful CEO was gone, replaced by a woman who looked as fragile as spun glass. Outside, the lights of the city twinkled like stars, each one representing a dream, a hope, a life in motion. Soon her own light would be extinguished, and the city would continue spinning without her. But as Kate stood there drowning in her own despair, she had no idea that salvation was watching from the shadows. Near the service entrance, partially hidden behind a pillar, a man in maintenance coveralls observed the scene with eyes that had witnessed far worse storms than corporate boardroom battles. Marcus Callahan had been cleaning the Imperial Hotel's floors for 3 years, invisible to the wealthy guests who treated him like living furniture. But tonight, as he watched the wolves circle their prey, something ancient and dangerous stirred in his chest, a feeling he had buried along with his uniform and medals. At his side, his 8-year-old daughter Lily tugged on his sleeve. She wasn't supposed to be here, but her babysitter had canceled at the last minute, and Marcus couldn't afford to miss a shift. The hotel's generous overtime pay was funding her school supplies and violin lessons, the kind of normal childhood he had never experienced. Daddy, Lily whispered, her dark eyes wide with concern. Why is that lady crying? Marcus followed his daughter's gaze to Kate, who stood alone in the center of the ballroom, her shoulders shaking with barely contained emotion. Something in her posture, the proud set of her spine even in defeat, the way she refused to let the tears fall, reminded him of another warrior he had once known. His unit's medic, Sarah, who had held her ground under enemy fire to save wounded soldiers even as the world exploded around her. Sometimes grown-ups have to face very hard problems, sweetheart, Marcus said softly, his voice carrying the weight of experience. And sometimes they have to face them alone. But nobody should have to be alone, Lily replied with the simple wisdom that only children possess. Doesn't she have any friends? Marcus was about to explain the complicated world of adult betrayals and corporate warfare when Kate's voice rang out across the ballroom, clear and defiant despite the tremor in her words. You want an answer, Brennan? Here it is. She turned to face the group of investors, her chin raised like a queen addressing her executioners. Novatech isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. You can take your threats, your lies, and your dirty money, and choose your next words very carefully, Brennan interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. The friendly mask had slipped completely, revealing the predator beneath. Because they might be the last ones you ever speak as a free woman. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Around the ballroom, conversations stopped. Waiters froze mid-step. Even the piano player's fingers stuttered on the keys. Everyone could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the moment when corporate warfare crossed the line into something far more personal and dangerous. Kate felt her mouth go dry. She had expected financial pressure, legal maneuvering, even public humiliation. But the cold promise in Brennan's voice suggested consequences that went far beyond business. "What are you saying?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "I'm saying that accidents happen," Brennan replied with a shrug that was anything but casual. Brilliant CEOs sometimes suffer from stress-related breakdowns. They make poor decisions, engage in erratic behavior, pose dangers to themselves and others. Sometimes they require specialized care. The implication was clear as a knife blade. Kate had heard whispers about Brennan's methods, competitors who had suffered mysterious accidents, whistleblowers who had disappeared into psychiatric facilities, journalists who had suddenly decided to change careers after receiving certain phone calls. "You're insane," she breathed. "I'm practical," Brennan corrected. "And I'm running out of patience. 28 minutes, Kate. Sign the papers, or I'll have you declared mentally incompetent and sign them myself as your court-appointed guardian." From his position by the pillar, Marcus felt his daughter's hand slip into his. Lily was scared. He could feel it in the tremor of her small fingers. She didn't understand the words being spoken, but children were natural barometers for danger, and the air was thick with it. Marcus had made a promise to himself when Lily was born. He would never again let innocent people suffer while he stood by and watched. He had walked away from the warrior's path, traded his rifle for a mop, his tactical gear for coveralls. But some oaths ran deeper than career changes, and some lines could never be uncrossed. "Stay right here, princess," he whispered to Lily, guiding her to a chair behind the pillar where she would be hidden but safe. "Daddy needs to help someone." "Is the lady in trouble?" Lily asked, her young voice carrying surprising understanding. Marcus looked down at his daughter, this perfect, innocent soul who saw the world in terms of right and wrong, help and harm. In her eyes, the complex machinations of corporate power meant nothing. There was simply a person who needed help and people who could provide it. "Yes, sweetheart, she's in very big trouble." "Then you have to help her," Lily said with absolute certainty. "That's what heroes do." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he had built around his heart 3 years ago when he had decided that Marcus Callahan, the janitor, was all that remained of Marcus Callahan, the warrior. But Lily was right. Heroes didn't choose their moments of truth. Those moments chose them. Across the ballroom, Kate stood frozen as Brennan's men began to circle closer. She recognized some of them, not investors, but security personnel, muscle disguised in expensive suits. The hotel's own security force was notably absent, which could only mean one thing: Brennan owned them too. "This is your last chance, Kate," Brennan said, pulling out a gold pen and placing it on the table next to a stack of legal documents. "Sign willingly, and you get to walk out of here with your dignity and a small fortune. Refuse, and, well, let's just say that mental health crises can be very unpredictable." Kate's hand moved toward the pen, her survival instincts warring with everything she believed in. She thought of her employees, good people with families and dreams who had trusted her to lead them safely through the storm. She thought of the technology she had developed, revolutionary advances in artificial intelligence that could change medicine, education, and human understanding itself. In Brennan's hands, those innovations would become weapons of control and manipulation. But as her fingers hovered over the pen, a quiet voice spoke from behind her. "Excuse me." The voice was calm, almost conversational, but it carried an authority that made everyone in the vicinity turn. Marcus stepped out of the shadows, his maintenance uniform a stark contrast to the designer clothing surrounding him. In the bright lights of the ballroom, he looked exactly like what he was supposed to be, a working-class nobody who cleaned up after his betters. Brennan glanced at him with the irritation of a king being interrupted by a peasant. "Security, remove this man. We're conducting private business here." But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he looked directly at Kate, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. There was kindness there, yes, but also a depth of strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond ordinary human experience. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, "I couldn't help but notice you seem to be having some trouble. Is there anything I can do to help?" The question was so simple, so genuine, that Kate felt tears spring to her eyes. In a room full of people who wanted to use her, control her, or destroy her, Here was someone offering help without asking for anything in return. I don't think anyone can help me, she whispered. Marcus nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes it feels that way. But in my experience, ma'am, there's always a choice, always another path. You just have to be brave enough to take it. Brennan's patience snapped. I said remove him now. Two of his security men stepped forward, their hands moving toward concealed weapons. Marcus saw the motion and felt the familiar calculations begin in his mind. Angles of attack, points of vulnerability, the precise amount of force needed to neutralize threats without causing permanent damage. It was like riding a bicycle. The skills came flooding back as if he had used them yesterday instead of 3 years ago. But he held himself perfectly still. Violence was a tool of last resort, and he hadn't reached that point yet. Gentlemen, Marcus said to the approaching security men, his voice carrying a new edge that made them hesitate. I'd suggest you take a step back. This is a private conversation between the lady and myself. You've got some balls, Janitor, one of the men sneered, reaching into his jacket. But balls don't stop bullets. That was when Marcus smiled, an expression so cold and predatory that both men froze mid-step. It was the smile of an apex predator who had just realized he was being threatened by house cats. You know, Marcus said conversationally, I've been shot at by professional killers, terrorists, and enemy soldiers. If you think you're going to intimidate me, you might want to reconsider your approach. The security man's hand stopped moving toward his weapon. Something in Marcus's tone and the absolute certainty of his words suggested that drawing a gun might be the last mistake he ever made. Brennan's eyes narrowed. There was something about this janitor that didn't add up, the way he moved, the confidence in his voice, the complete lack of fear in the face of armed men. Who are you? He demanded. Marcus turned his attention to Brennan, and for a moment their eyes locked. In that instant, recognition flared in Brennan's face like a struck match. The color drained from his cheeks and his hand began to tremble almost imperceptibly. Hello, Kyle, Marcus said softly. It's been a long time. The name hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Around the ballroom, the tension ratcheted up another notch as people sensed that something fundamental had just shifted. This was no longer a simple business dispute or even a case of corporate intimidation. This had become personal. Kate watched the exchange with growing confusion and hope. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could see that the balance of power had suddenly shifted. Brennan, the man who had seemed so confident, so untouchable, now looked like he had seen a ghost. You're supposed to be dead, Brennan whispered. Marcus's smile turned arctic. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, but I remember yours weren't the first tears shed at my funeral. The past crashed over both men like a tidal wave. Kyle Brennan, then Captain Kyle Brennan, standing over Marcus's broken body in a bombed-out building in Afghanistan. The explosion that was supposed to kill the entire unit, but had somehow left Marcus alive, though everyone believed him dead. The medals and honors that Brennan had received for heroically attempting to save his men, when in reality, he had been the one who had sold their location to enemy forces for a briefcase full of Taliban gold. Marcus had spent 2 years in a Taliban prison, 2 years of torture and interrogation that had forged him into something harder than steel. And when he had finally escaped, when he had finally made it home, he had discovered that Kyle Brennan had used his heroic sacrifice to launch a private military company that now operated in the gray spaces between law and chaos. I don't know what game you're playing, Brennan said, his voice steadier now but his eyes still showing traces of the fear that had seized him. But this is neither the time nor the place. On the contrary, Marcus interrupted, I think this is exactly the right time and place. You see, Kyle, I made a promise to myself when I got out of that hole you left me in. I promised that I would never again stand by and watch innocent people suffer while cowards and bullies had their way. He took a step forward, and despite being outnumbered 50-1, despite wearing coveralls instead of body armor, despite carrying a mop instead of a rifle, Kyle Brennan took an involuntary step backward. Ms. Morell, Marcus said without taking his eyes off Brennan, you don't have to sign anything tonight. You don't have to surrender to threats or intimidation. You have choices, and you have allies you didn't know existed. Kate felt something spark to life in her chest, a flame she had thought was extinguished forever. But the lawsuits, the financial pressure, can be fought in court where they belong, Marcus replied. With lawyers and evidence and justice, not with threats and hired muscle. Brennan's composure cracked completely. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections, resources, power that you can't even imagine. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Marcus said quietly. A coward who betrays his own men for money. A bully who preys on people who can't fight back. A small, pathetic man who thinks power means hurting others. The words hit Brennan like physical blows. Around the ballroom, his investors and security personnel shifted nervously. This wasn't part of the plan. Their untouchable leader was being dressed down by a janitor, and none of them knew how to respond. You want to know who I am? Marcus continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent ballroom. I'm Marcus Callahan, former Navy SEAL Team 6. I've served my country in more hellholes than you can pronounce, and I've seen what real courage looks like. It doesn't look like you. A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Navy SEAL Team 6, the elite of the elite, the men who went places that didn't exist to do things that never happened. The janitor they had ignored, dismissed, treated as invisible furniture was one of America's most elite warriors. Kate stared at Marcus with new eyes. The quiet man who had offered her help wasn't just any good Samaritan. He was a trained killer, a professional warrior, who had chosen to stand between her and destruction. The knowledge should have frightened her, but instead, she felt safer than she had in months. Security, Brennan shouted, his voice cracking slightly. Remove this man. Remove him now. But his security team hesitated. Facing down an angry businessman was one thing. Engaging a Navy SEAL was quite another. Even outnumbered, even out of practice, Marcus Callahan represented a level of lethality that most of them had only heard about in whispered stories. Marcus sensed their hesitation and pressed his advantage. Gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that threatening a private citizen, carrying weapons without proper permits, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping are all federal crimes. I'd suggest you consider whether your paychecks are worth 20 to life in federal prison. One by one, Brennan's men began to step back. They were hired muscle, not fanatics, and facing federal prison time for a corporate takeover wasn't part of their job description. This isn't over, Brennan snarled, but his retreat was already beginning. You have no idea what you've started. I know exactly what I've started, Marcus replied. I've started evening the odds. As Brennan and his reduced entourage began to withdraw, Marcus turned to Kate. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, not just age, but the accumulated weight of carrying others' burdens. This was a man who had seen too much done, too much sacrificed, too much. Yet when he looked at her, his expression was gentle, almost protective. Are you all right, ma'am? He asked. Kate nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. Her entire world had just shifted on its axis. I don't understand. Why did you help me? You don't even know me. Marcus glanced toward the pillar where Lily waited, her wide eyes taking in everything with the serious attention of a child trying to understand the adult world. My daughter asked me why you were crying. When I told her you were in trouble, she said I had to help because that's what heroes do. He looked back at Kate with a slight smile. Turns out, 8-year-olds have a better grasp of right and wrong than most adults. Kate followed his gaze and saw Lily for the first time, a beautiful little girl with her father's dark eyes and an expression of solemn wisdom. The sight of her brought fresh tears to Kate's eyes. But these were different tears. Not despair, but something closer to hope. What happens now? Kate asked. Now, Marcus said, you go home, get some sleep, and tomorrow you start fighting back the right way. With lawyers, investigators, and truth on your side. It won't be easy, but you're stronger than you think. How do you know? Marcus's smile turned warmer. Because you were ready to sign those papers to protect your employees. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. And character, Ms. Morell, is something Kyle Brennan will never understand. As the crowd began to disperse and the immediate crisis passed, Kate realized that her ordeal was far from over. Brennan would regroup, find new ways to attack, bring fresh pressure to bear. But for the first time in months, she felt like she had a fighting chance. "Mr. Callahan," she said as Marcus began to move away. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary, ma'am. Just promise me you won't give up. The world needs people like you, people who create instead of destroy, who build instead of tear down." Kate nodded, feeling strength flowing back into her limbs. "I promise." As Marcus collected his daughter and headed for the service exit, Kate watched them go with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. She had been saved by a janitor who was secretly a Navy SEAL, protected by a warrior who chose to live in the shadows. It was the stuff of movies and novels, yet it had just happened to her. But as she made her own way to the exit, Kate had no idea that Brennan was already on his phone in the parking garage, calling in favors from very dangerous people. The war for Novatech was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And tomorrow, Marcus Callahan would discover that some enemies never forget, and some wars follow you home, no matter how far you run. In the quiet of the hotel lobby, as the last guests departed and the staff began cleaning up the evening's drama, a small pool of spilled champagne caught the light from the chandeliers, looking remarkably like blood on the marble floor. The storm was coming, and it would test every lesson Marcus had learned about courage, every promise he had made about protecting the innocent, and every bond he had forged with the daughter who believed her father was a hero. Some battles end where they begin, others follow you home. The morning sun cast long shadows across Marcus's modest apartment as he prepared Lily's breakfast, the events of the previous night weighing heavily on his mind. 3 years of carefully constructed normalcy had been shattered in a single moment of recognition, and he knew that Kyle Brennan wouldn't simply retreat into the darkness. Men like Brennan never forgot a humiliation, especially one delivered in front of their peers and subordinates. "Daddy, you're burning the pancakes," Lily observed from her perch at the small kitchen table, her school backpack already packed and waiting by the door. Marcus startled, realizing he had been staring out the window instead of watching the griddle. He quickly flipped the pancakes, salvaging what he could. "Sorry, Princess. Daddy's mind was somewhere else." "Were you thinking about the lady from last night?" Lily asked with the uncanny perceptiveness that children possessed. "She seemed really scared." Marcus set the plate in front of his daughter, choosing his words carefully. Lily had witnessed enough of the confrontation to understand that something significant had happened, but he didn't want to burden her 8-year-old mind with the full complexity of adult warfare. "Sometimes grown-ups have problems that are hard to solve," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "And sometimes those problems follow them around for a while. Like when Tommy Morrison kept bothering me at school until you talked to his parents." Marcus smiled despite his concerns. "Something like that, sweetheart. But bigger." Lily considered this while methodically cutting her pancakes into perfect squares, a habit she had inherited from her father's military precision. "Will the bad man try to hurt the lady again?" The question hit closer to home than Marcus was comfortable with. "I hope not, Lily, but if he does, there are people who will help her. People like you." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He had tried so hard to give Lily a normal life, to shield her from the violence and chaos that had defined his own childhood and military career. Yet here she was, already understanding that sometimes good people had to stand up to bad people, regardless of the personal cost. "Yes," he said quietly. "People like me." Across town, Kate Morrell stood in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Novatech building, staring out at the city skyline as her assistant briefed her on the overnight developments. The view that had once filled her with pride and accomplishment now felt like a prison cell, beautiful, expensive, but ultimately confining. The Wall Street Journal is running a story about the incident at the Imperial Hotel. Sarah Chen, her longtime assistant, reported while scrolling through her tablet. They're calling it a heated business disagreement, but some of the tech blogs are speculating about a hostile takeover attempt. Kate turned from the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. She had slept perhaps 2 hours, spending most of the night researching Marcus Callahan and finding almost nothing. The man existed in official records, social security number, apartment lease, employment history with the hotel. But beyond that, he was a ghost. No social media presence, no credit history before 3 years ago, no digital footprint that would indicate a life lived before he appeared in the city with a young daughter and a job application. What about Brennan? Any response from Meridian Industries? Their PR department issued a statement saying that Mr. Brennan was simply attending a social event and had no comment on unsubstantiated rumors and speculation. Sarah's tone carried the skepticism of someone who had worked in corporate communications long enough to recognize carefully crafted lies. But I've been monitoring their stock price, and it's up 3% in pre-market trading. Kate felt a chill run down her spine. They're positioning this as a victory, making it seem like they successfully pressured us. There's more, Sarah continued reluctantly. David Chen called this morning. He wants to meet with you privately, says it's urgent. The mention of her former friend's name brought fresh pain. Kate had trusted David with everything: her technology, her company's future, her friendship. Learning that he had betrayed her felt like losing a limb, a phantom ache that would probably never fully heal. Set up the meeting, Kate said after a long pause. Conference room B, and make sure building security knows to keep it private. Are you sure that's wise, after what happened? I need to hear it from him directly. Kate's voice carried a steel that surprised even her. I need to understand why. An hour later, David Chen sat across from Kate in the sterile conference room, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something that looked remarkably like shame. He had always been a large man, built like the former college football player he was, but today he seemed diminished, hunched over, as if carrying an invisible weight. Kate, he began, then stopped, running his hands through his graying hair. God, I don't even know where to start. Start with why, Kate said simply. Why you sold out 5 years of friendship and partnership for whatever Brennan offered you. David's face crumpled. He didn't just offer me money, Kate. He threatened my family. My daughter Emily's medical condition, the experimental treatment she needs, costs $200,000 a year. Insurance won't cover it because it's still in clinical trials. Kate felt her anger deflate slightly. Emily Chen was a bright, beautiful 16-year-old with a rare genetic disorder that affected her immune system. Kate had attended her birthday parties, watched her grow from a shy little girl into a confident young woman who wanted to be a doctor herself someday. So you turned over our quantum encryption protocols, the AI learning algorithms, 5 years of breakthrough research. He knew about Emily's condition before I ever told him. David's voice was barely above a whisper. He had medical records, insurance claims, doctor's reports. Then he showed me what happened to other people who had refused his offers. Kate, I've seen the photos. Accidents that weren't accidents. Families that disappeared. Kate leaned back in her chair, the full scope of Brennan's operation beginning to crystallize in her mind. This wasn't just corporate espionage. It was systematic intimidation on a scale that suggested resources and connections far beyond a typical business rival. Why didn't you come to me? We could have figured something out. We always have before. Because he made it clear that involving you would only put you in danger too. David looked up, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and guilt. He said if I brought you into it, Emily wouldn't just lose her treatment, she would lose her life. The room fell silent except for the hum of the building's ventilation system. Kate stared at her former friend, and saw a man who had been systematically broken by someone who understood exactly which pressure points to apply. What does he want you to do now? Continue working normally, provide updates on any new developments, and... David hesitated, clearly struggling with what came next. And what? Report on your activities, who you meet with, what countermeasures you're planning. He wants to stay ahead of any attempts to fight back. Kate felt the trap closing around her. Brennan hadn't just stolen her technology, he had turned her closest ally into an unwilling spy. Every move she made would be reported, every strategy anticipated, every weakness exploited. There's something else, David continued, his voice dropping even lower. He asked specifically about the janitor from last night, Marcus Callahan. He wants to know everything about him, where he lives, his schedule, his daughter's school. Kate, I think he's planning something terrible. The mention of Marcus and his daughter sent ice through Kate's veins. She thought of Lily's wide, trusting eyes, the way she had looked at her father with absolute faith that he would protect her from the adult world's complexities. The idea of that innocent child becoming collateral damage in Brennan's war was unbearable. "You have to warn him," Kate said urgently. "Whatever Brennan is planning." "I can't." David's voice broke completely. "Kate, you don't understand. I'm being watched 24 hours a day. My phone is tapped. My emails are monitored. There are people following Emily to school. If I step out of line even slightly, they'll know." Kate stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, Marcus Callahan was going about his normal day, unaware that he had painted a target on his back by standing up for a stranger. The knowledge that her salvation might cost him and his daughter their safety was almost too much to bear. "There has to be something we can do." "Maybe," David said hesitantly. "But Kate, you need to understand what you're really up against. Meridian Industries isn't just a private military company. They're a shadow organization with contracts in 40 countries, connections to intelligence agencies, and enough political influence to make problems disappear permanently." Kate turned back to her friend, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. David wasn't just a betrayer. He was a victim, caught in a web of intimidation and fear that had left him no good choices. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so goddamn sorry, Kate. You deserved better than this. You deserved better than me." Before Kate could respond, David stood and walked toward the door. As his hand touched the handle, he paused without turning around. "The janitor, Marcus. When he stood up to Brennan last night, I saw something in Brennan's face I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, genuine fear. Whatever history those two have, it goes deeper than business." David finally turned his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Be careful who you trust, Kate, and be even more careful who you save." Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus was discovering that his carefully constructed new life was beginning to unravel in ways both subtle and profound. The hotel's day manager, a thin, nervous man named Peterson, had called him into the office for what he described as a routine review. But Marcus could smell fear on him, like cheap cologne. "There have been some complaints," Peterson said, shuffling through paperwork with hands that trembled slightly. "Guests saying you were inappropriate last night, overstepping boundaries." Marcus sat perfectly still, his expression neutral, but his mind racing. "Could you be more specific about these complaints? Someone said you were harassing guests, making them uncomfortable with your presence, getting involved in private conversations that weren't your business." "I see." Marcus's voice remained calm, but something cold was growing in his chest. "And these complaints came from whom exactly?" Peterson's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "I can't reveal specific names, of course, guest privacy and all that, but the complaints were significant enough that management feels a suspension might be appropriate. Just temporary, you understand, until we can investigate fully." Marcus leaned forward slightly, and Peterson instinctively pressed back in his chair. There was something predatory in the movement, something that reminded the day manager that the man across from him was capable of violence in ways that Peterson couldn't even imagine. "Mr. Peterson," Marcus said quietly, "in 3 years of employment here, I've never received a single complaint. I've worked double shifts without complaint, covered for other employees, and maintained the highest performance ratings in my department. So I'm curious what changed between yesterday and today." I can't really say. Let me help you out." Marcus's voice remained conversational, but there was steel beneath the silk. "You received a phone call this morning. Someone with enough influence to make you very nervous. Someone who suggested that employing me might be problematic for the hotel." Peterson's face went pale, confirming Marcus's suspicion. The pressure was already beginning, subtle but unmistakable. First his employment, then probably his apartment lease, his daughter's school enrollment. Every aspect of the normal life he had built being systematically dismantled. "I have a daughter, Mr. Peterson. She depends on this job for her food, her education, her future. Are you really going to destroy a child's security based on a phone call from someone who wasn't even a guest at this hotel? I'm sorry, Marcus, I really am, but my hands are tied. The suspension is effective immediately, and the investigation will take at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. Marcus stood slowly, his movements controlled but carrying an undercurrent of barely restrained power. 2 weeks, just long enough for whatever comes next to happen. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Marcus placed his hands flat on Peterson's desk, leaning forward until they were eye to eye. You know exactly what this is about, and you know exactly what kind of man you're dealing with. The question is, when this is all over, will you be able to live with the choices you made today? Peterson's mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. Marcus straightened, adjusted his uniform shirt for the last time, and walked toward the door. Marcus, Peterson called after him, his voice cracking slightly. For what it's worth, I think you're a good man. I hope things work out for you and your daughter. Marcus paused at the threshold, his hand on the doorknob. Mr. Peterson, let me give you some advice. When powerful people start making phone calls about ordinary citizens, nobody is safe. Not me, not my daughter, and not you. Think about that the next time your phone rings. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Peterson alone with his paperwork and his conscience. That afternoon, as Marcus picked up Lily from school, he noticed the black sedan parked across the street from the building. The same car that had been outside their apartment building that morning and outside the grocery store where he had stopped for milk. The surveillance wasn't even particularly subtle. Either they wanted him to know he was being watched, or they didn't care enough to hide their presence. Daddy, who are those men in the car? Lily asked as they walked home, her small hand secure in his larger one. Just some people who are curious about us, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about. But Marcus was worried. The speed with which Brennan had moved the resources he was deploying suggested an organization far more sophisticated than a typical corporate rival. Military-grade surveillance, political connections capable of pressuring civilian employers, and most concerning of all, a willingness to target an 8-year-old child to get to her father. As they reached their apartment building, Marcus made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. Instead of going inside, he guided Lily to the small park across the street, settling onto a bench where they could see anyone approaching from multiple directions. Lily, he said carefully, do you remember the games we used to play when you were smaller? The ones about being very quiet and very careful. Lily's expression grew serious. Despite her youth, she had inherited her father's ability to sense when situations required absolute attention. The hiding games. That's right. Well, I think we might need to play those games again for a little while. Some bad people are angry with Daddy because he helped the nice lady last night, and they might try to cause trouble for us. Are we going to have to move again? Lily asked, and Marcus's heart broke a little at the resignation in her voice. They had moved 4 times in 3 years, as he had tried to find the perfect place to disappear, small enough to be anonymous, large enough to provide opportunities far enough from his past to feel safe. I don't know yet, Princess, but I want you to remember what we practiced, okay? If anything happens, if Daddy tells you to run or hide, you do it immediately without asking questions. Can you do that for me? Lily nodded solemnly. Are the bad people going to hurt you? Marcus pulled his daughter closer, feeling the weight of every choice that had led them to this moment. They're going to try, sweetheart. But Daddy has dealt with bad people before, and he's very good at protecting the people he loves. Will the nice lady be okay? The question surprised him. Despite everything that was happening to them, Lily was still thinking about Kate, still worried about a stranger who had shown them kindness. It was perhaps the most perfect example of the pure heart that Marcus was determined to protect no matter the cost. I hope so, Lily. I really hope so. But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew that hope alone wouldn't be enough. Brennan was escalating the situation faster than expected, which meant he was either operating under pressure from above, or he had resources and timelines that Marcus didn't yet understand. Either way, the next few days would determine whether Marcus Callahan could successfully remain dead to the world, or whether he would have to resurrect skills and connections he had hoped never to use again. That evening, as he tucked Lily into bed in their modest apartment, Marcus made another decision that would change everything. He pulled out a cell phone he hadn't used in 3 years, a secure device with only one number programmed into its memory. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "I wondered when you'd call." "Hello, Bear," Marcus said quietly, using the call sign that had followed his former teammate through 3 tours of duty and a dozen classified operations. "I need a favor." "Let me guess, the past caught up with you." "Something like that. How much do you know about Meridian Industries?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Marcus began to wonder if the connection had been lost. When Bear finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Brother, you've stepped in some deep shit. Meridian isn't just a PMC, they're a black ops subsidiary with contracts in places that don't officially exist. Kyle Brennan isn't just their CEO, he's a sanctioned asset for people who reshape countries when they get bored." Marcus felt the walls of his carefully constructed life crumbling around him. How sanctioned? The kind where if you disappear, nobody asks questions and no investigations get opened. "Marcus, what the hell did you do?" "I stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for herself." Bear's laugh was bitter. "Same old Marcus, still picking fights with people who outgun you by orders of magnitude." "It's not just about me anymore, Bear. They're threatening my daughter." The line went quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, darker, more dangerous. When Bear spoke again, his voice carried the cold promise of a man who had killed for country, for brotherhood, and for principles that transcended politics. That was a mistake on their part. "I need information, resources, and probably backup. You'll have all 3. But Marcus, once we start down this path, there's no going back to your quiet life. You understand that, right?" Marcus looked toward Lily's bedroom, where his daughter slept peacefully, trusting that her father would keep the monsters at bay. In the morning, she would wake up expecting breakfast cartoons and another normal day in the life they had built together. She had no idea that her father was about to make choices that would either secure their future or destroy everything they had built. "I understand," Marcus said, "but they made it clear that there was never going to be a quiet life as long as they knew I was alive." "Then it sounds like it's time to remind them why they thought you were dead in the first place." As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized that the war for Kate Morrell's company had become something much larger and far more personal. Brennan had made the classic mistake of a bully. He had assumed that because Marcus had chosen to disappear, he had also chosen to surrender. Tomorrow would prove just how wrong that assumption had been. In her downtown apartment, Kate Morrell stood at her own window, looking out at the city lights and wondering if somewhere among those millions of people Marcus Callahan was making his own preparations for what was to come. She had spent the evening researching everything she could find about Meridian Industries, and what she had discovered made her stomach turn. Government contracts for security consulting in war zones, allegations of human rights violations that were quickly buried under national security classifications, financial connections to arms dealers, drug cartels, and worse. This wasn't just about corporate espionage. This was about an organization that existed in the spaces between law and chaos, accountable to no one and capable of anything. Yet somehow the thought of Marcus and his daughter facing such an enemy alone was unbearable. Whatever happened next, Kate knew she couldn't simply hide behind lawyers and hope for the best. Some battles required more than legal maneuvering. Some battles required warriors. As the clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of what would prove to be the most dangerous day of their lives, neither Kate nor Marcus could have imagined just how far Kyle Brennan was willing to go to secure his victory. By dawn, everything would change. The first sign that everything had gone to hell came at 5:47 a.m. when Marcus's phone buzzed with an emergency alert from the building's security system. Someone had attempted to access the stairwell leading to his floor, triggering the motion sensors he had installed as an early warning system. Marcus was already awake, had been for hours, sitting in the darkness of his living room with a clear view of both the front entrance and the fire escape. He moved silently to Lily's room where his daughter slept peacefully under a canopy of glow-in-the-dark stars they had arranged together just 2 weeks ago. The normalcy of the scene, her stuffed elephant tucked under one arm, her school clothes laid out for the day, felt like a knife twisting in his chest. This was what they were really after, not just his life, but her innocence, her safety, her right to grow up without the shadows that had haunted his own childhood. "Princess," he whispered gently, shaking her shoulder. "Time for our hiding game." Lily's eyes opened immediately, alert in the way that only children who had learned to trust their parents' instincts could be. She didn't ask questions, didn't complain about the early hour. She simply nodded and reached for the backpack they had prepared together, the one containing 3 days' worth of clothes, her favorite book, and the encrypted phone that would connect her to Bear if something happened to her father. "Remember the rules?" Marcus asked as he helped her into her jacket. "Stay quiet, stay hidden, and if you don't come back in 6 hours, call Uncle Bear." Lily's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the fear she was trying to hide behind her brave facade. "That's my girl." Marcus kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo one more time. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky. More than all the fish in the sea." Lily completed their ritual, managing a small smile despite everything. Marcus led her to the building's old service elevator, a relic from the 1950s that most residents had forgotten existed. He had discovered it during his initial security survey of the building, and over the past 3 years he had carefully maintained it as an emergency escape route. The elevator descended directly to the basement where a service tunnel connected to the adjacent building's parking garage. "Mrs. Rodriguez is expecting you," Marcus said as he activated the tunnel's lighting system. "You remember the address, 1247 Pine Street, apartment 4B, Mrs. Rodriguez used to be a teacher, and she makes the best flan in the city." Lily recited the information with the precision of a military briefing, another skill she had absorbed from her father without fully understanding its significance. Maria Rodriguez was a 68-year-old retired elementary school teacher who had befriended Marcus and Lily at the local library. More importantly, she was also the widow of a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant who had served 3 tours in Vietnam. When Marcus had approached her about a hypothetical emergency scenario, she had understood immediately what he was really asking and had agreed without hesitation to serve as Lily's safe house. "If anyone asks, you're her great-niece visiting from Phoenix," Marcus continued as they reached the tunnel's exit. "You have cousins there, you love the desert, and you hate the city's rain." "I know, Daddy. We practiced this 100 times. Marcus knelt to his daughter's level, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "Lily, listen to me very carefully. The bad people who are coming, they're going to try to use you to hurt Daddy. That's why you have to stay hidden no matter what you hear, no matter what anyone tells you. Even if they say I'm hurt, even if they say I want you to come out. Do you understand?" Lily's lower lip trembled slightly, but she nodded. "Will you really be okay?" Marcus thought about the 50 men that Bear's intelligence suggested Brennan had brought to the city, about the surveillance teams that had been tracking his movements for the past 18 hours, about the weapons and tactics that would soon be deployed against him. The honest answer was that his survival was far from guaranteed. But Lily didn't need honesty right now, she needed confidence. "I've been in tougher spots than this, Princess, and I always come home. Promise." Marcus hesitated for just a moment, knowing that promises made to children carried a weight that even military oaths couldn't match. "I promise to do everything in my power to come home to you." It wasn't quite the same thing, but it was as close to the truth as he could get without terrifying her. Lily seemed to understand the distinction, and she nodded solemnly before disappearing into the tunnel that would carry her to safety. As Marcus watched his daughter's small figure fade into the darkness, he felt the final pieces of Marcus Callahan. The janitor falling away, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. He had hoped never to resurrect this part of himself, but Brennan had made that choice for him. If they wanted a war, they would get one, but it would be fought on his terms in his city, with rules that would leave no doubt about who the real predator was. Marcus returned to his apartment through the building's main entrance, moving openly and deliberately. He wanted them to see him, to know he was there, to believe they had him trapped. The black sedans had multiplied overnight. He counted at least 6 vehicles in a 3-block radius, their occupants trying and failing to look like ordinary citizens. Amateur hour, Marcus thought with grim satisfaction. Brennan's people might be well-funded, but they clearly lacked experience in urban warfare. Back in his apartment, Marcus opened a closet that appeared to contain nothing but old clothes and seasonal decorations. But when he pressed a specific sequence of panels, a hidden compartment revealed the tools of his former trade: tactical gear weapons, communications equipment, and medical supplies. Everything he had hoped never to need again, but had been unable to bring himself to destroy. As he methodically checked each piece of equipment, Marcus's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Bear. Package delivered. 50 hostiles confirmed. Electronic warfare assets in position. Give the word and we light them up. Marcus smiled grimly as he replied, "Negative on the fireworks. This needs to look like self-defense. Urban rules of engagement." "Copy that. We'll be ghosts until you need us." The response was exactly what Marcus had expected. Bear understood that involving active military personnel in what was essentially a domestic dispute would create political complications that could destroy them all. This had to be handled quietly, professionally, and with enough plausible deniability to keep the authorities from asking too many questions. Meanwhile, across the city, Kate Morrell was discovering that her own morning had taken a decidedly dangerous turn. She had awakened to find her apartment's security system disabled and a message waiting on her bathroom mirror, written in what appeared to be lipstick. "Conference room B, 1 hour, come alone." The Imperial Hotel's conference room was exactly as she remembered it from countless business meetings. Sterile, windowless, and designed to make everyone uncomfortable enough to conclude their business quickly. But today the space felt more like an interrogation chamber, especially with Kyle Brennan seated at the head of the polished table like a king holding court. "Kate," Brennan said without rising as she entered. "So good of you to join me. I trust you found my invitation compelling." "Breaking into my apartment was unnecessary," Kate replied, taking a seat across from him with more confidence than she felt. "You could have simply called." "Could I? After your janitor's little performance the other night, I wasn't sure you were still capable of rational conversation." Kate studied Brennan's face, looking for some sign of the fear that David had described. Instead, she saw only cold calculation and barely restrained violence. Whatever advantage Marcus had gained through recognition and intimidation had clearly worn off. "What do you want, Kyle?" "The same thing I've always wanted. Your signature on a transfer of ownership. Your complete surrender. Your acknowledgement that you were never strong enough to play in my league." "And if I refuse?" Brennan smiled, but there was nothing warm about the expression. "Let me show you something." He placed a tablet on the table between them, its screen displaying a live video feed from what appeared to be a tactical operations center. Kate could see multiple screens showing different angles of an apartment building, with red dots indicating personnel positions and weapon placements. "Your knight in shining armor is currently trapped in his apartment with enough firepower aimed at him to level half the building," Brennan explained with obvious satisfaction. "One word from me and Marcus Callahan becomes a very messy memory." Kate's blood turned to ice. "You're insane. You can't just murder someone in broad daylight." "Can't I?" "Marcus Callahan is a dangerous ex-military operative with known PTSD issues who has been stalking you for weeks. When my security team attempted to serve you with a restraining order, he opened fire on civilian personnel. Tragic, really, but entirely predictable given his psychological profile." The casual way Brennan described the fabricated scenario made Kate's stomach turn. This wasn't just corporate intimidation. This was the systematic destruction of an innocent man's life for the crime of showing basic human decency. "The beautiful part," Brennan continued, "is that his death will serve a dual purpose. It eliminates a potential threat to my operations, and it provides you with the motivation you need to make the right choice." "You're talking about cold-blooded murder." "I'm talking about problem solving. Marcus Callahan became a problem the moment he decided to involve himself in our business relationship. Now he gets to serve as an object lesson in the consequences of heroic gestures." Kate stared at the tactical display, watching the red dots move into position around the building where Marcus lived. Somewhere in that structure was a man who had risked everything to help a stranger, and now he was going to die because she had been too proud to simply sign Brennan's papers. "What about his daughter?" she asked quietly. "What about her children are remarkably resilient? She'll be placed in foster care, probably forget all about her father within a few years. Might even thank us someday for removing such an unstable influence from her life." The callousness of the statement hit Kate like a physical blow. She thought of Lily's wide, trusting eyes, the way she had looked at her father with absolute faith that he would always protect her. The idea of that beautiful child growing up believing her father had been a violent criminal was unbearable. "Stop this," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll sign whatever you want. Just call off your people." "Oh, but it's too late for that." Brennan's smile widened. "You see, I've realized that simply acquiring Novatech isn't enough anymore. Your little rebellion, your refusal to accept the natural order of things, it requires a more permanent lesson." Kate felt the trap closing around her with mechanical precision. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Marcus Callahan dies today regardless of what you do. The only question is whether you join him or whether you live long enough to sign over everything you've ever worked for before suffering your own tragic accident." The tablet's screen suddenly split, showing not just the tactical feed of Marcus's building, but also live surveillance footage from outside Kate's own apartment, her office building, and her parents' home in suburban Detroit. The message was crystal clear. Brennan could reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. "You have 30 minutes to make your final decision," Brennan said, standing and adjusting his suit jacket with the casual precision of a man who had never doubted his own victory. "I suggest you use them wisely." As Brennan left the conference room, Kate remained seated, staring at the tablet's display and feeling the weight of impossible choices. She could surrender everything she had built and potentially save Marcus's life, or she could fight back and watch an innocent man die for her principles. Either choice felt like a betrayal of everything she believed in. But as she studied the tactical display more closely, Kate began to notice something that Brennan's confidence had prevented him from seeing. The red dots representing his personnel were positioned exactly where a conventional security team would place them, covering obvious exit routes, maintaining visual contact with the target building, following textbook urban surveillance protocols. What they weren't doing was adapting to the reality that their target wasn't a conventional threat. Marcus Callahan had spent years learning to think like his enemies, to anticipate their tactics, to turn their own strengths against them. And if Kate was reading the tactical display correctly, Brennan's people had just walked into the kind of trap that military professionals called a killing field. Back in his apartment, Marcus was making his own final preparations as the noose tightened around him. He had identified 53 hostile personnel in a 6-block radius, along with electronic jamming equipment sniper teams and what appeared to be a mobile command center disguised as a city maintenance truck. The scope of the operation suggested that Brennan was taking no chances. This was an overwhelming force designed to eliminate any possibility of escape or resistance, which was exactly what Marcus had been counting on. The tactical doctrine that had governed his military career could be summed up in a single phrase: make them fight your fight. When facing superior numbers and firepower, the key was to control the terrain, dictate the timing, and force the enemy to operate under conditions that negated their advantages. Marcus's apartment building was a converted warehouse from the 1920s, built with thick brick walls, steel support beams, and a maze of utility tunnels that connected to the city's old pneumatic mail system. More importantly, it was situated at the convergence of 3 major streets, creating natural choke points that would force Brennan's people to approach from predictable directions. As Marcus donned his tactical gear for the first time in 3 years, he felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling across his shoulders. This wasn't just about his own survival anymore, it was about proving that bullies and tyrants couldn't simply take whatever they wanted through violence and intimidation. Some things were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. His secure phone buzzed with another message from Bear. Hostile teams moving into final position. They're jamming civilian communications, but our gear is still clean. Say the word and we intervene. Marcus typed back, "Negative. Let them come. I want them to commit fully before we spring the surprise." "You sure about this, brother? 50-1 odds aren't exactly encouraging." "They're not 50 to 1 odds," Marcus replied. "They're 50 scared mercenaries who think they're hunting a janitor about to discover they've cornered a wolf." As if summoned by his words, Marcus's building's fire alarm began blaring, not the steady tone of an actual emergency, but the intermittent pattern that indicated a manually triggered alert. Brennan's people were making their move using the alarm as cover for their approach, and as justification for evacuating the building's other residents. Marcus moved to his living room window, peering through the blinds at the street below. Black-clad figures were already emerging from vehicles moving with the practiced efficiency of professional soldiers. They wore full tactical gear and carried military-grade weapons, but their movement patterns revealed critical flaws in their training. These were mercenaries accustomed to operating in war zones where collateral damage was acceptable, and civilian oversight was minimal. They had no experience with the kind of precision urban warfare that Marcus had perfected in places like Fallujah and Mosul. The first team reached the building's main entrance, stacking up in formation before breaching the door with a shaped charge that sent splinters flying in all directions. The explosion was loud enough to justify the fire alarm and would serve as Marcus's signal that the dance had officially begun. He moved to a position behind his kitchen counter where he had cleared fields of fire toward both the front door and the emergency stairwell. The apartment's layout would force attackers to expose themselves completely before they could bring their weapons to bear, creating what military tacticians called a fatal funnel, a space where superior numbers meant nothing because only 1 or 2 attackers could engage at a time. The sound of boots in the hallway grew louder, accompanied by the sharp whispers of tactical communications. Marcus counted at least 8 voices, which meant they were sending an entire squad to take one man. The overwhelming force was meant to ensure quick victory, but it also meant that most of Brennan's people would be concentrated in a single location when the trap was sprung. Breaching in 3, 2, 1, shoy. The front door exploded inward in a shower of wood and metal, followed immediately by a flashbang grenade that filled the apartment with blinding light and deafening noise. But Marcus had been expecting the assault, and he had positioned himself with his back to the blast, his eyes protected by military-grade goggles. As the first attacker rounded the corner into the kitchen, Marcus moved with the fluid precision of a man who had performed similar actions thousands of times in training and dozens of times in combat. The intruder never had a chance to raise his weapon before Marcus's hands found his throat and helmet, applying pressure with surgical precision that rendered him unconscious without causing permanent damage. The second attacker, seeing his partner collapse, began to raise his rifle, but found himself facing empty space as Marcus rolled behind the kitchen island. A thrown kitchen knife, weighted and balanced for exactly this purpose, caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the floor. Contact, target is hostile and armed." The panicked voice over the tactical radio carried clearly through the apartment, along with the sounds of confusion and surprise from the hallway. Marcus smiled grimly as he heard the squad leader trying to regain control of the situation. They had expected to find a frightened janitor hiding in a closet, not a professional warrior who had turned his home into a fortress. The psychological advantage was already shifting in his favor. But the real surprise was yet to come. As the remaining squad members prepared for a coordinated assault, the building's electrical system suddenly failed, plunging the entire structure into darkness. Emergency lighting should have activated immediately, but those systems had been quietly disabled over the past 3 years as part of Marcus's contingency planning. In the absolute darkness that followed, Marcus moved like a ghost through an apartment he knew better than his own heartbeat. Every piece of furniture, every potential obstacle, every tactical advantage had been memorized and rehearsed until navigation required no conscious thought. The attackers, meanwhile, were struggling with night vision equipment that had been designed for outdoor operations, not the close-quarters combat of a residential building. Their technological advantages were becoming liabilities as they bumped into furniture, lost contact with their squad mates, and began firing at shadows. "Where is he? I can't see anything." Negative contact. Negative contact. "Johnson's down, man down." The chaos in the tactical communications revealed the complete breakdown of their operational discipline. These weren't elite soldiers, they were hired guns who had never faced an opponent capable of turning their own tools against them. Marcus moved through the darkness like death itself, appearing behind isolated attackers, just long enough to render them unconscious, before fading back into the shadows. He used non-lethal techniques whenever possible, knowing that dead mercenaries would bring unwanted attention from law enforcement, while unconscious ones could simply be charged with breaking and entering. Within 10 minutes, the entire assault team had been neutralized, their unconscious forms scattered throughout the apartment like discarded toys. Marcus gathered their weapons and communications equipment, along with the tactical intelligence that would prove invaluable for what came next. But as he monitored their radio traffic, Marcus realized that the apartment assault had been merely the opening move in a much larger operation. Brennan's remaining forces were already moving into position around the building, preparing to level the entire structure if necessary to eliminate their target. "Ground team is down," came the voice over the command channel. "I repeat, all ground team members are unresponsive. Target appears to have significant defensive capabilities." "Copy that. Initiate Protocol 7. Bring the whole building down." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Protocol 7 was military terminology for a controlled demolition. They were planning to destroy the entire building and blame it on a gas leak or electrical fire. Every innocent resident who hadn't been able to evacuate would become collateral damage in Brennan's war. He activated his secure communication device, sending an emergency signal to Bear civilian building targeted for demolition. Immediate intervention authorized. Gloves are off. The response was immediate. "Roger that. Cavalry is inbound. Hold position and prepare for fireworks." Marcus moved to his living room window, looking out at the street where Brennan's forces were setting up what appeared to be a mobile command center. Through his tactical scope, he could see Kyle Brennan himself standing beside a black SUV, speaking animatedly into a satellite phone while gesturing toward the building. For a moment, Marcus considered taking the shot that would end everything, one bullet to remove the source of the threat permanently. But killing Brennan would only create a power vacuum that someone else would fill, and it would make Marcus a fugitive for the rest of his life. There had to be a better way. That was when he noticed the news van pulling up to the police barricade that had been established 3 blocks away. And then another van. And then a helicopter with a news station's logo clearly visible on its side. Someone had tipped off the media. As Marcus watched, reporters and camera crews began setting up equipment with the practiced efficiency of professionals who smelled a major story developing. The live news coverage would make it impossible for Brennan to simply demolish the building and cover up the evidence. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Thought you might need some witnesses. A friend." He didn't recognize the number, but something about the message's tone made him suspect that Kate Morrell had managed to turn the tables on her captor. Somehow, she had gotten word to the media and turned Brennan's private war into a very public spectacle. The psychological warfare was just beginning. As the first news helicopter arrived on scene, its cameras capturing footage of heavily armed mercenaries surrounding a residential building, Brennan's tactical advantage began to evaporate. What had been designed as a quick, clean elimination was now playing out on live television for the entire city to see. Marcus activated the building's public address system, his voice carrying clearly to the street below, and more importantly, to the news cameras that were broadcasting live to millions of viewers. "My name is Marcus Callahan, and I am a United States Navy veteran who served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan. The men surrounding this building are private military contractors employed by Kyle Brennan of Meridian Industries, and they are here because I had the audacity to help a woman who was being threatened by corporate bullies." The words hit the airwaves like a bombshell, instantly reframing the narrative from a law enforcement operation to a military assault on a veteran and his family home. Social media exploded with outrage as viewers realized they were watching armed mercenaries laying siege to an apartment building in the heart of an American city. "Mr. Brennan," Marcus continued his voice, carrying the authority of a man who had spoken truth to power in far more dangerous circumstances, "you wanted to demonstrate your strength. You wanted to show the world what happens to people who stand up to you. Well, congratulations. You've got the world's attention. Now let's see if you have the courage to face me yourself, or if you're content to hide behind hired guns and threaten innocent children." The challenge was broadcast live to every major news network, creating a moment of public theater that would be impossible to ignore or cover up. Brennan could no longer simply make the problem disappear. He would have to resolve it in front of witnesses under the scrutiny of a nation that was rapidly taking sides. As Marcus watched from his window, he could see Brennan's face contorted with rage and frustration. The carefully planned operation had become a public relations nightmare, and every minute that passed was making things worse. But Kyle Brennan was far from finished. If he couldn't solve the problem quietly, he would solve it publicly, using the media attention to send an even stronger message about the consequences of defying his authority. The real battle was just beginning. The silence that followed Marcus's public challenge stretched for exactly 17 seconds, long enough for every news network in the country to replay his words for social media, to explode with hashtags supporting the veteran, and for Kyle Brennan to realize that his carefully orchestrated operation had become a catastrophic public relations disaster. When Brennan finally responded, his voice carried through a megaphone with the forced calm of a man barely containing his rage. Marcus Callahan, you are surrounded by lawfully authorized security personnel, responding to credible threats against a private citizen. Surrender immediately, and no one will be harmed. The lie was so brazen, so obviously fabricated for the cameras that Marcus almost laughed. But he could see the fear in the faces of Brennan's mercenaries, men who had signed up for overseas operations where accountability was minimal and witnesses were scarce. Being filmed while conducting a military assault on American soil was not part of their job description. Lawfully authorized by whom? Marcus called back, his voice amplified by the building's PA system so that every news microphone could capture his response. Show me the warrant. Show me the court order. Show me any legal documentation that authorizes private military contractors to lay siege to a residential building. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown at Brennan's feet. Around the police perimeter, reporters were already making phone calls to legal experts. Fact-checkers were examining public records, and investigative journalists were digging into Meridian Industries' corporate structure. The longer this standoff continued, the more scrutiny would fall on Brennan's empire of shadows and intimidation. But Kyle Brennan hadn't built his fortune by backing down from confrontations, and he certainly wasn't going to start now in front of a live television audience. Instead, he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He chose to escalate. Mr. Callahan, Brennan said, his voice now carrying a silky threat that made the news crews lean forward with their microphones. You mentioned children. How is your daughter Lily this morning? Still safe at school, I hope. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, driving him back from the window as if he had been shot. His secure phone was already buzzing with an emergency message from Bear. Package compromised. School evacuation in progress. Hostile team moving on secondary location. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. They had found Lily. Despite all his precautions, all his planning, all his desperate attempts to keep her safe, Brennan's people had tracked her to Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. The one thing Marcus had sworn to protect above all else was now being used as leverage against him. You bastard, Marcus whispered, but his voice carried clearly through the PA system, broadcasting his anguish to millions of viewers who were beginning to understand the true stakes of this confrontation. Daddy issues, Mr. Callahan. Brennan's voice dripped with mock sympathy. I can certainly relate. My own father taught me that power is the only thing that matters in this world. The ability to take what you want when you want it from whoever is too weak to stop you. From her position in the news van, she had commandeered through a combination of corporate credentials and sheer determination. Kate Morrell watched the confrontation unfold with growing horror. She had managed to escape from the hotel conference room during Brennan's moment of distracted triumph, using his own tactical tablet to send alerts to every major news organization in the city. But she had never imagined that he would be willing to threaten a child on live television. This has to stop, she said to Detective Sarah Chen. No relation to David, the lead investigator who had arrived on scene as soon as the first reports of armed mercenaries had reached police headquarters. He's threatening an 8-year-old girl. Detective Chen, a 20-year veteran with 3 children of her own, was already coordinating with federal agencies as the situation spiraled far beyond local police jurisdiction. Ms. Morrell, I need you to tell me everything you know about Kyle Brennan and his organization. Everything. Kate pulled out her phone, scrolling through the research she had conducted over the past 18 hours. Meridian Industries operates in 43 countries, with contracts worth over $2 billion annually. They provide security consulting for governments, corporations, and private individuals, but their real business is intimidation and elimination of obstacles to their clients' objectives. And Brennan himself, former military discharged under circumstances that are still classified. He built Meridian using connections from his service record recruiting soldiers who were willing to operate outside conventional legal frameworks. The company has been linked to assassinations, kidnappings, and regime changes in at least 12 countries. Detective Chen felt her blood run cold. And this man is currently holding a veteran and his daughter hostage in the middle of our city. Not just any veteran, Kate added quietly. Marcus Callahan served with Navy SEAL Team 6. If Brennan is willing to escalate this far, it means he sees Marcus as an existential threat to his entire operation. Meanwhile, 3 miles across the city, Bear and his team were executing their own desperate rescue mission at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment building. The elderly teacher had proven to be exactly as formidable as Marcus had hoped. When Brennan's people had come for Lily, they had found themselves facing a woman who had lived through the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, and 40 years of teaching in inner-city schools. She was not easily intimidated. "You men need to leave right now," Mrs. Rodriguez had told the armed mercenaries when they broke down her door, positioning herself between them and the closet where Lily was hidden. "This is a home, not a battlefield, and you have no business terrorizing children." The lead operative, a scarred man named Torres, who had served 3 tours in Iraq before joining Meridian, found himself oddly reluctant to push past the small gray-haired woman who stood before him, like an immovable force of nature. Something about her reminded him of his own grandmother, who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident. "Ma'am, we're looking for a little girl, 8 years old, dark hair, traveling with a man who may be armed and dangerous. We need to take her into protective custody." Mrs. Rodriguez's laugh was like steel wrapped in velvet. "Protective custody. Young man, I've been protecting children since before you were born, and I can smell a lie from 3 blocks away. You're not police officers, and you're certainly not here to protect anyone." Before Torres could respond, the building's windows began exploding inward as Bear's team initiated their own assault from 3 different directions simultaneously. Unlike Brennan's mercenaries, these were active-duty military personnel operating under emergency authorization from a contact high within the Pentagon's Special Operations Command structure. The gunfight that followed was brief, professional, and decisive. Brennan's people were skilled, but they were facing opponents who had trained together for years and who were fighting to protect an innocent child rather than collect a paycheck. Within minutes, the mercenaries were either unconscious or in tactical withdrawal, leaving behind enough weapons and communications equipment to supply a small army. Package secured. Bear reported over his encrypted channel to Marcus. "Little bird is safe and sound, moving to secondary extraction point." Marcus felt 20 years of accumulated tension drain from his shoulders as he received the message. Lily was safe. Whatever happened next, whatever prices had to be paid, his daughter would survive this madness and grow up to fulfill all the potential that burned so brightly within her young soul. But the relief also brought with it a cold, calculating fury that Marcus had not felt since his darkest days in the Taliban prison. Brennan had crossed the one line that could never be uncrossed. He had threatened Marcus's child. The rules of engagement had just changed completely. "Kyle," Marcus said over the PA system, his voice now carrying a lethal calm that made even the news reporters step back from their microphones. "You made a mistake. You thought you could use my daughter to control me. Instead, you've just removed the only thing that was keeping me civilized." Through his tactical scope, Marcus could see Brennan's face go pale as he recognized the shift in his opponent's tone. This was no longer the voice of a man trying to protect his family. This was the voice of a predator who had just been unleashed. "You want to know who I really am?" Marcus continued, moving through his apartment with predatory grace as he gathered the weapons and equipment he had taken from the assault team. "I'm the man who survived 2 years in a Taliban prison because I was too stubborn to die. I'm the man who escaped from a facility that had never lost a prisoner because I refused to let my captors win. I'm the man who spent 3 years hunting the people who betrayed my unit and who disappeared into the shadows only when I was satisfied that justice had been served. The biographical details sent the news researchers into overdrive, frantically cross-referencing classified military records and intelligence reports. What they found painted a picture of a soldier who had become something approaching a legend within the special operations community, a man who had accomplished impossible missions and survived unsurvivable situations through sheer force of will. And now, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout, "You've reminded me why I was so good at that job." Kyle Brennan's tactical discipline finally cracked completely. The careful corporate executive facade fell away, revealing the paranoid, sadistic mercenary underneath. "You think you can threaten me? You think hiding in that building makes you safe? I have enough firepower out here to turn you into a memory." "Then use it," Marcus challenged. "Show the world what Kyle Brennan really is. Show them the man who uses military weapons against American citizens. Show them the coward who threatens children to get his way. Go ahead, Kyle, give the order." The silence that followed was deafening. Every camera lens, every microphone, every pair of eyes in the crowd was focused on Brennan, waiting to see if he would actually authorize the use of military force against a residential building in broad daylight on live television. For a moment, it seemed as though he might actually give the order. His hand moved toward the radio clipped to his tactical vest, his finger hovering over the transmission button. The mercenaries around him tensed, some clearly hoping he would back down, others preparing to carry out whatever command he gave. But before Brennan could speak, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife through silk. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Federal Judge Margaret Walsh, and you are now operating under a federal restraining order that prohibits any further aggressive action against Mr. Callahan or his property." Judge Walsh emerged from behind the police perimeter, flanked by FBI agents and federal marshals who had arrived on scene with documentation that had been prepared with unprecedented speed. The 70-year-old jurist had built her reputation on cases involving government overreach and corporate malfeasance, and she was not about to allow a private military operation to unfold in her jurisdiction. "Your Honor," Brennan stammered, clearly caught off guard by the federal intervention, "this is a private security matter. This is a domestic terrorist incident involving the use of military-grade weapons against American citizens," Judge Walsh corrected with steel in her voice. "Your people are armed with weapons that are illegal for civilian use. You have made threats against a child, and you have laid siege to a residential building without any legal authority whatsoever." The federal agents began moving through Brennan's forces with the systematic efficiency of professionals who had dealt with similar situations before. They confiscated weapons, detained personnel, and began the process of documenting evidence that would eventually fill dozens of federal indictments. But Kyle Brennan was not finished. He had built his empire by understanding that raw power often trumped legal niceties, and he had resources that went far beyond the mercenaries currently being arrested by federal agents. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Brennan told Judge Walsh, his voice carrying a quiet menace that made the federal marshals step closer to their protectee. "I have contracts with agencies that don't officially exist. I have friends in places that would make your blood run cold. This isn't over." "You're absolutely right," Judge Walsh replied with calm authority. "This is far from over. You're going to spend the next several decades in federal prison, assuming you survive the investigation into your organization's international activities." As federal agents placed Brennan in restraints, Marcus emerged from his building for the first time since the siege began. He moved with the fluid grace of a professional warrior, but his hands were raised and empty, showing clearly that he posed no threat to the law enforcement officers on scene. The crowd of reporters and onlookers fell silent as Marcus approached the police perimeter. This was their first clear look at the man who had single-handedly held off 50 mercenaries and turned a corporate intimidation campaign into a federal case. What they saw was neither the dangerous terrorist that Brennan had described, nor the helpless victim that some had expected. Instead, they saw a quiet, competent man who radiated the kind of confidence that came from having faced far worse situations and emerged victorious. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet street. "My name is Marcus Callahan, and I want to thank you for bearing witness to what happened here today. You probably saved my life and the life of my daughter, simply by showing up and turning your cameras on. Kate Morrell pushed through the crowd of reporters, her eyes bright with unshed tears, as she approached the man who had risked everything to help her. When she reached him, she found herself at a loss for words. How do you thank someone who has sacrificed their carefully constructed life to protect a stranger? Mr. Callahan, she finally managed. I don't know how to... No thanks necessary, ma'am, Marcus interrupted gently. You did the hard part. You stood up to him when it would have been easier to give in. You turned his strength against him by bringing in witnesses. And most importantly, you proved that bullies only win when good people decide not to fight back. Detective Chen approached with the preliminary paperwork that would allow Marcus to reunite with his daughter. Mr. Callahan, we're going to need extensive statements from you about Meridian Industries' activities. But Judge Walsh has authorized your immediate release. Your daughter is safe at a federal facility, and we can arrange transport whenever you're ready. Marcus nodded gratefully, but his attention remained focused on Kate. There was something in her expression, a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that made his pulse quicken despite everything they had just endured. What happens now? Kate asked. To Novatech, to the technology Brennan stole, to all of this. Now, said Agent Sarah Martinez, the FBI's lead investigator on corporate espionage cases, we spend the next year dismantling one of the largest private military conspiracies in American history. Mr. Brennan's organization has been under investigation for months, but we never had enough evidence to move against them. Today's events have given us everything we need. Now Kate felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. So Novatech is safe. More than safe, Agent Martinez confirmed. The technology that was stolen will be returned, the patent disputes will be resolved in your favor, and Meridian Industries' assets will be frozen pending the criminal proceedings. You'll probably end up owning several of your former competitors by the time this is all sorted out. As the crowd began to disperse and the immediate crisis passed, Marcus found himself alone with Kate for the first time since their encounter at the Imperial Hotel. The artificial lighting of the news crews cast strange shadows across their faces, making the moment feel somehow timeless and significant. I keep thinking about what you said that first night, Kate said quietly. About there always being a choice, always being another path. I thought I was trapped, that I had no options left. But you showed me that sometimes the only way forward is to stand and fight. Marcus smiled, and for the first time in days, the expression reached his eyes. My daughter taught me that one. She said, heroes help people who need help. Turns out 8-year-olds understand justice better than most adults. I'd like to meet her properly, Kate said. When this is all over, when things are normal again, if that's all right with you. Marcus studied her face, seeing past the corporate executive to the woman who had risked everything to protect innocent people from a monster's ambitions. I think Lily would like that very much. She's been asking about the nice lady ever since that night. As they spoke, neither of them noticed the news cameras that were still rolling, capturing this quiet moment of connection between two people who had found something precious in the midst of chaos and violence. The footage would later become iconic, a reminder that even in the darkest times, human decency and courage could still triumph over greed and cruelty. But their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a small figure who broke free from her federal escort and ran toward them with the boundless energy of a child who had been separated from her father for far too long. Daddy? Lily called out as she launched herself into Marcus's arms, her small body trembling with relief and exhaustion. Marcus caught his daughter and held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling his world settle back into its proper alignment. Everything else, the corporate intrigue, the federal investigation, the media attention faded into background noise as he focused on the most important thing in his universe. I was so scared, Lily whispered against his shoulder. Mrs. Rodriguez said you were fighting bad people, and I thought maybe you wouldn't come back. I promised I would have come home, Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. And I always keep my promises to you. Lily pulled back to look at her father's face, her young eyes serious and searching. Are the bad people gone now? Marcus glanced over at the federal agents who were processing the arrested mercenaries at Kyle Brennan, sitting in the back of an FBI vehicle with his hands cuffed behind his back, at the news crews, documenting the aftermath of what would soon be known as the Imperial Hotel incident. Yes, Princess, the bad people are gone. Kate watched the reunion between father and daughter with tears streaming down her face, understanding for the first time the true cost of Marcus's heroism. He hadn't just risked his own life to help her. He had risked the most precious thing in his world, the safety and security of his child. When Lily finally noticed Kate standing nearby, she studied the woman with the same serious attention she gave to everything important in her young life. "Are you the nice lady Daddy helped?" Lily asked with characteristic directness. "Yes," Kate replied, kneeling down to bring herself to the child's eye level. "Your daddy saved me from some very bad people. He's a real hero." Lily nodded solemnly, as if this confirmed something she had always known. "Daddy used to be a soldier. He's very good at fighting bad people." "The best," Kate agreed, glancing up at Marcus with an expression that made his heart skip a beat. As the federal agents finished their initial processing and the news crews began packing up their equipment, Marcus realized that his carefully constructed life of anonymity was permanently over. There was no going back to being invisible, no returning to the simple existence of Marcus Callahan, the janitor. The man who had emerged from that apartment building was someone different. Someone who had remembered that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the personal cost. But as he looked at his daughter's trusting face and saw the admiration in Kate's eyes, Marcus understood that perhaps anonymity had been overrated anyway. Sometimes the best way to protect the people you love is to stand in the light and face whatever darkness comes for them. Judge Walsh approached the small group with documentation that would formally close the immediate legal proceedings. "Mr. Callahan, the federal government owes you a debt of gratitude. Your actions today have exposed a conspiracy that threatened national security and civilian safety. We won't forget what you've done." Marcus nodded respectfully but didn't reply. He had never fought for gratitude or recognition. He had fought because it was the right thing to do, because innocent people deserve protection, and because his daughter needed to grow up in a world where bullies didn't always win. As they prepared to leave the scene that had forever changed their lives, Kate made a decision that surprised even her. "Mr. Callahan, Marcus, I have a proposition for you." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite his exhaustion. "Novatech is going to need a new head of security, someone with experience in threat assessment, crisis management, and protecting valuable assets. The position comes with a substantial salary, excellent benefits, and the freedom to work on projects that could change the world for the better." Marcus smiled, understanding the offer for what it really was, not just a job, but an invitation to be part of something larger than himself, something that would honor the skills he had developed while serving a purpose he could believe in. "What kind of projects?" he asked. Kate's eyes lit up with the passion that had driven her to build Novatech in the first place. Medical AI that could revolutionize cancer treatment, educational software that could bring quality instruction to underserved communities, clean energy solutions that could help heal the planet, the kind of work that makes the world a little bit better every day. Lily tugged on her father's sleeve, looking up at him with the wisdom that only children possess. "Daddy, that sounds like hero work." Marcus laughed, a sound of pure joy that had been absent from his life for far too long. "You know what, Princess? I think you're absolutely right." As the three of them walked away from the scene of the confrontation, followed by a small parade of federal agents, news crews, and curious onlookers, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope for the future. Not just survival, not just getting through another day, but genuine excitement about what tomorrow might bring. Behind them, Kyle Brennan sat in the federal transport vehicle, watching through bulletproof glass as his carefully constructed empire crumbled around him. He had spent years building an organization that operated in the shadows beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement. But he had made the fatal mistake of bringing that darkness into the light of threatening innocence in front of witnesses who refused to look away. The last thing Brennan saw as the vehicle pulled away from the scene was Marcus Callahan walking hand in hand with his daughter toward a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. It was an image that would haunt him through every day of the federal prison sentence that awaited him. Some battles end where they begin. Others open doors to new worlds entirely. For Marcus Callahan, Kate Morrell and 8-year-old Lily, who believed her father was a hero, the real adventure was just beginning. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the executive conference room on the 42nd floor of the Novatech building, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold and amber. The view that had once symbolized Kate's isolation now represented possibility, hope, and the kind of future that seemed almost too good to be true. In his hands, he held a tablet displaying the morning's news headlines, each one a testament to how completely their world had changed. Meridian Industries CEO sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. Tech executive Kate Morrell named Forbes' Entrepreneur of the Year. The janitor who brought down a shadow empire. Novatech's revolutionary cancer treatment enters Phase 3 trials. The stories had become legend told and retold until the facts had taken on the mythic quality of David facing Goliath. But sitting in this quiet moment before the day began, Marcus understood that the real story was much simpler and infinitely more complex than any headline could capture. It was the story of ordinary people who had chosen to do extraordinary things because someone needed help. "You're up early." Kate's voice came from behind him, warm with the intimacy that had grown between them over the months of working together, healing together, and slowly learning to trust in the possibility of happiness. Marcus turned to find her silhouetted in the doorway, her hair catching the morning light in a way that made his breath catch, despite the countless times he had seen her over the past 6 months. She wore a simple blue dress that emphasized her eyes, and the confidence that had been so battered during their first encounter had returned stronger than ever. "Old habits," Marcus replied with a smile. "Soldiers learn to appreciate the quiet moments before the storm." "Is there a storm coming?" Kate asked, moving to stand beside him at the window. Their shoulders touched a contact that still sent electricity through both of them, despite its familiarity. "There's always a storm coming somewhere," Marcus said philosophically. "But today feels like a calm day, a good day." Kate smiled, remembering how Lily had described her father's wisdom during one of their many conversations over the past months. The 8-year-old had become a regular fixture in the Novatech offices, treating the research labs like her personal playground, and charming every scientist, engineer, and security specialist in the building. Her presence had transformed the sterile corporate environment into something warmer, more human, more alive. "Speaking of good days," Kate said, producing a letter from her jacket pocket. "This arrived by special courier this morning, from the Pentagon." Marcus accepted the letter with the wariness of a man who had learned not to trust official correspondence from his former employers. But as he read the contents, his expression shifted from suspicion to surprise to something approaching wonder. "They want to offer me a consultant position," he said quietly. "Ethics review for special operations, making sure that future missions don't create the kind of moral compromises that destroyed my unit." Kate studied his face, seeing the conflict there. She had learned to read Marcus's expressions over the months they had worked together, and she could see that this offer represented both vindication and temptation. The military that had abandoned him was now asking for his help in preventing similar tragedies. "What will you tell them?" she asked. Marcus folded the letter carefully, his movements precise and thoughtful. "I'll tell them that my consulting days are over. I have more important work to do here." The simple declaration carried layers of meaning that Kate understood perfectly. Marcus had found his place in the world, and it wasn't in the shadows of government operations or the moral ambiguity of military service. It was here in the light, protecting people who created rather than destroyed, who built rather than conquered. "The board meeting is in an hour," Kate reminded him, though they both knew he hadn't forgotten. Marcus Callahan never forgot important details, whether they involved threat assessments or corporate presentations. "Are you nervous?" Marcus asked, noting the slight tension in Kate's shoulders that had appeared whenever she mentioned the board meeting over the past week. "Terrified," Kate admitted with a laugh that held no humor. I'm about to ask 12 of the most conservative, risk-averse investors in Silicon Valley to approve the largest humanitarian technology initiative in corporate history. They're going to think I've lost my mind." Marcus turned to face her fully, his expression serious, but warm. "Kate, 6 months ago, you stood up to Kyle Brennan when he had you outnumbered 50-1. Today, you're worried about convincing a dozen businessmen to invest in saving lives. That was different. That was survival. This is—" Kate struggled to find the words for what this initiative meant to her. "This is everything I've ever dreamed of accomplishing. If they say no, if the funding doesn't come through, then all of this, the cancer research, the educational programs, the clean energy projects, it all dies before it ever has a chance to help anyone." Marcus reached out and took her hands in his, marveling, as he always did, at how perfectly they fit together, despite the different paths that had brought them to this moment. "Do you remember what you told me that first night, when I asked why you were willing to lose everything rather than surrender to Brennan?" Kate closed her eyes, remembering the desperation of that moment, the feeling that her entire world was crumbling around her. "I said that some things are worth fighting for, even when you can't win." "And do you still believe that, more than ever?" Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his entire face, from the watchful intensity of a professional warrior to the gentle warmth of a man deeply in love. "Then you already know what you're going to say to the board. You're going to tell them the truth. You're going to show them what's possible when brilliant people are given the resources to change the world. And if they're not smart enough to recognize that opportunity, then they don't deserve to be part of what you're building." Kate felt the familiar surge of strength that Marcus's confidence always brought her. Over the past 6 months, she had discovered that his faith in her was unshakable, a foundation she could build upon even when her own certainty wavered. "What if they say no anyway?" she asked, voicing the fear that had kept her awake for the past 3 nights. "Then we find other investors, other partners, other ways to make it happen." Marcus's voice carried the absolute certainty of a man who had learned that there was always another path, always another option, as long as you were willing to keep fighting. "Kate, what you've built here isn't just a company. It's proof that business can be a force for good in the world. That kind of vision doesn't die because a few old men lack imagination." Before Kate could respond, the conference room door opened to admit Lily Callahan, who burst in with the boundless energy of a child who had important news to share. She wore her school uniform, but had added a visitor's badge that read, "Future Scientist," in bold letters, a gift from the Novatech research team that had become her honorary aunts and uncles. "Daddy Kate, Dr. Martinez said the cancer medicine is working even better than expected," Lily announced with the uncomplicated joy of someone too young to understand why adults found such news surprising. "The mice are all getting better, and she thinks human testing will start next month." Marcus scooped his daughter into his arms, spinning her around as she giggled with delight. The sound filled the conference room with a lightness that no amount of corporate success could match. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had watched Lily bloom in ways he had never dared to hope for. The constant fear that had shadowed their early years together had been replaced by the confidence of a child who knew she was loved, protected, and free to dream as big as her imagination allowed. "That's wonderful news, Princess," Marcus said, settling Lily on his hip so she could look out the window at the city spread below them. "Dr. Martinez and her team are doing very important work. She said I could be a scientist too when I grow up." Lily continued with the matter-of-fact certainty that characterized all her pronouncements. "I want to make medicine that helps sick children feel better." Kate felt her heart clench with emotion as she watched the interaction between father and daughter. This was what they were really fighting for, not just corporate success or technological advancement, but the chance for children like Lily to grow up in a world where their dreams weren't limited by circumstance or fear. "I think you'd make an excellent scientist," Kate told Lily seriously. "Scientists ask lots of questions and never give up looking for answers. You're already very good at both of those things." Lily beamed with pride, then turned to study Kate with the intense focus she brought to all her observations. Are you nervous about the big meeting? The directness of the question caught Kate off guard. She had become accustomed to Lily's ability to cut through adult complexities and arrive at the heart of any situation, but it still amazed her how perceptive the child could be. A little bit, Kate admitted, seeing no point in trying to hide the truth from someone who could read emotions as clearly as most people read books. Don't be, Lily said with the absolute confidence that only children possess. You're really good at talking to people and making them understand important stuff. Plus, Daddy will be there to protect you if anyone tries to be mean. The simple faith in her words brought tears to Kate's eyes. Over the past 6 months, she had discovered that Lily's approval meant more to her than any professional accolade or financial success. This beautiful, brilliant child had become the daughter she had never known she wanted, and the chance to be part of her life felt like a gift beyond measure. "Thank you, sweetheart," Kate said, kneeling down to hug Lily properly. "That makes me feel much better." Marcus watched the exchange with emotions too complex to name. 6 months ago, his world had consisted of himself, his daughter, and the constant vigilance required to keep them both safe. Now he found himself part of something larger and infinitely more rewarding. A family that had been chosen, rather than born, bound together by shared values, rather than shared blood. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. There had been awkward moments, as they learned to navigate the boundaries between professional colleagues and something deeper. There had been nights when Marcus's protective instincts clashed with Kate's fierce independence, and mornings when the weight of their shared trauma made simple conversation feel like walking through a minefield. But there had also been Sunday mornings in Kate's apartment, where Lily taught them both to make pancakes shaped like animals. There had been quiet evenings in Marcus's living room, where Kate read bedtime stories with voices for all the characters, while Marcus marveled at how naturally she had stepped into the role of surrogate mother. There had been stolen moments in the Novatech corridors, where their hands would brush as they passed documents back and forth, each contact a reminder of the connection that grew stronger every day. "Mr. Callahan," came a voice from the doorway interrupting Marcus's reverie. Sarah Chen, Kate's assistant, stood in the entrance with the kind of expression that suggested important news. "Agent Martinez is here. She says it's about the Brennan investigation." Marcus felt his protective instincts surge to the surface, even though he knew that Kyle Brennan was safely locked away in a federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 40 years. The investigation into Meridian Industries had uncovered corruption that reached into dozens of countries and hundreds of government contracts, making Brennan's organization one of the largest criminal conspiracies in modern history. "Show her in," Kate said, automatically moving closer to Marcus in a gesture that had become instinctive over the months they had testified in various proceedings. Agent Sarah Martinez entered the conference room with the bearing of someone who brought good news but understood the gravity of the situation that had created it. She had been the lead federal investigator on the Meridian case, and over the past 6 months she had developed a genuine respect for the courage that Marcus and Kate had shown in bringing down Brennan's empire. "Good morning," Agent Martinez said, accepting Marcus's handshake and Kate's embrace with equal warmth. "I wanted to deliver this news in person rather than through official channels." She produced a folder marked with federal classification stamps and placed it on the conference table. "As of this morning, the last of Kyle Brennan's co-conspirators has been sentenced. Meridian Industries has been officially dissolved and all of its assets have been liquidated to pay restitution to the families of their victims." Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten it was there. "It's really over." "It's really over," Agent Martinez confirmed. "Brennan himself will spend the rest of his life in federal prison, along with most of his senior leadership. The few who were granted plea agreements in exchange for their testimony have been permanently barred from any security-related work, and will be under federal supervision for the next 20 years. Kate sank into one of the conference room chairs, overwhelmed by the finality of it all. For months she had lived with the fear that somehow Brennan would find a way to escape justice to return and finish what he had started. The knowledge that he was permanently neutralized felt like stepping out of a dark room into bright sunlight. "There's something else," Agent Martinez continued, producing a second folder. The federal government has approved a victims' compensation fund using assets seized from Meridian Industries. Ms. Morell, the amount allocated to cover your losses and provide recognition for your cooperation in the investigation is substantial. Kate opened the folder and stared at the number written on the official documentation. It was enough money to fund her humanitarian initiatives for the next decade without requiring a single dollar from investors. Enough to ensure that her vision of technology serving humanity could become reality, regardless of what happened in today's board meeting. I don't know what to say. Kate whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Say you'll use it to change the world, Agent Martinez replied with a smile. Because that's exactly what the Justice Department hopes will happen. Your work here at Novatech has already attracted international attention. The cancer research, the educational programs, the clean energy initiatives, governments around the world are watching what you accomplish, and they're beginning to understand that private enterprise can be a force for good when it's guided by the right principles. Lily, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the serious attention she brought to all important matters, suddenly spoke up with a question that cut to the heart of everything they had been through. Does this mean the bad man can never hurt anyone ever again? Agent Martinez knelt down to Lily's level, understanding that this answer might be the most important one she would give today. Yes, sweetheart. The bad man is locked away where he can never hurt anyone again. And because of what your daddy and Kate did, a lot of other bad people who worked with him are locked away too. The world is safer because of how brave all of you were. Lily nodded solemnly, processing this information with the gravity it deserved. Then, with the resilience that never failed to amaze the adults around her, she brightened and turned to more pressing concerns. Can I go tell Dr. Martinez about the compensation fund? She's been worried about funding for the children's wing of the research program. Kate laughed through her tears, amazed once again by Lily's ability to focus on what truly mattered. Yes, sweetheart. I think Dr. Martinez would very much like to hear that news. As Lily skipped out of the conference room with the enthusiasm of a child bearing good news, Agent Martinez prepared to leave. But she paused at the door, looking back at Marcus and Kate with an expression of genuine admiration. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I've been a federal agent for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of people face impossible odds. But I've never seen anyone handle crisis the way you two did. You didn't just survive what Brennan threw at you. You turned it into something positive, something that will help people for generations to come. That's not just courage. That's wisdom. After Agent Martinez left, Marcus and Kate found themselves alone in the conference room for the first time since early that morning. The silence stretched between them, comfortable but charged with the weight of everything that had been resolved and everything that remained unspoken. The board meeting is in 20 minutes. Kate said finally, though neither of them moved toward the door. Are you still nervous? Marcus asked, moving closer until they were standing face to face in the golden light streaming through the windows. No, Kate realized with surprise. I'm not nervous anymore. I'm excited. For the first time in months, I'm genuinely excited about the future. Marcus reached up to touch her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek with a gentleness that still amazed her. Good. Because the future is going to be extraordinary. How can you be so certain? Because... Marcus said, his voice soft but sure. We're building it together, you, me, Lily, all the brilliant people who work here, all the families who will benefit from the medicine we develop, all the children who will receive better education because of the programs we create. We're not just running a company, Kate. We're proving that love and hope and human decency are more powerful than greed and fear. Kate felt her heart swell with emotions that were still too new, too precious to trust completely. Marcus, I know, he said, understanding what she couldn't quite say. I feel it too. The kiss that followed was soft and tentative, a promise rather than a declaration, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for months but were still too fragile to fully examine. When they separated, both of them were smiling with the wonder of people who had found something they hadn't known they were looking for. We should probably get to that board meeting, Kate said, though she made no move to step away from Marcus's embrace. Probably, he agreed, his arms tightening around her slightly. But Kate, whatever they decide in there, whatever happens with the funding or the initiatives or any of it, We're going to be okay. All of us. We're going to be more than okay. Kate smiled, feeling the absolute truth of his words settle into her bones like sunlight. More than okay. Sounds perfect. The board meeting that followed would be remembered as a turning point in corporate history. The moment when a room full of conservative investors chose to fund hope over profit margins. Kate's presentation was passionate, detailed, and utterly convincing, but it was the quiet presence of Marcus Callahan, former Navy SEAL, turned head of security, turned guardian of dreams, that provided the foundation of trust that made it all possible. When the unanimous vote came through, approving the largest humanitarian technology investment in Novatech's history, Kate felt the same surge of triumph she had experienced when she first stood up to Kyle Brennan's threats. But this time, the victory was shared, the burden distributed among people who cared about more than personal gain. As the board members filed out congratulating Kate and discussing implementation timelines, Marcus remained in his seat watching his daughter color in a corner of the conference room, while Kate fielded questions about project management and oversight committees. This, he realized, was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of challenges or struggles, but the presence of purpose, family, and the absolute certainty that they were building something worthwhile together. 6 months later, as Marcus stood in the same conference room, reading about Novatech's latest breakthrough in personalized cancer treatment, he marveled at how completely their lives had changed. The company now employed over 1,000 people across 3 continents, with research facilities that looked more like university campuses than corporate offices. The humanitarian initiatives that had seemed so risky a year ago were now being copied by companies around the world, proving that profit and principles could coexist. But the real measure of their success wasn't in the financial reports or media coverage. It was in the letters they received from families whose children had been saved by Novatech's medical advances, from teachers in remote villages who now had access to world-class educational technology, from communities that had been transformed by clean energy solutions that made environmental protection economically viable. "Daddy," Lily's voice interrupted his thoughts, though she was now 9 years old and preferred "Dad" in public settings. "Kate wants to know if you're ready for the wedding planning meeting." Marcus turned to see his daughter standing in the doorway of his office wearing the junior researcher badge that had replaced her visitor's pass when she turned 9 and officially joined Novatech's Future Scientists program. The innocence that had characterized her 8-year-old observations had evolved into a sharp intelligence that reminded Marcus daily of how quickly children grew and changed. "Wedding planning meeting?" Marcus asked with mock confusion, though his smile gave away his genuine excitement. "Don't pretend you forgot," Lily said with the exasperated tone that only pre-teenage children could master. "You and Kate have been planning this for months, and I'm supposed to help choose between the white roses and the pink ones for the ceremony." The ceremony in question was still 3 months away, but it had already become the most anticipated event in Novatech's corporate calendar. Kate Morrell and Marcus Callahan's wedding would be held in the company's memorial garden, a space they had created to honor the victims of corporate violence, and to serve as a reminder that business success should never come at the cost of human dignity. "Well," Marcus said, standing and offering his arm to his daughter, with the formal gallantry that had become one of their shared jokes, "we certainly can't keep the bride waiting." As they walked through the Novatech corridors toward Kate's office, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a janitor trying to disappear from the world, focused solely on protecting his daughter from the shadows of his past. Now he was the chief security officer of a multinational corporation, engaged to a woman who had revolutionized the relationship between business and social responsibility, and father to a child who spoke casually about her plans to cure genetic diseases. The transformation still amazed him, but what amazed him more was how natural it all felt. He had spent years believing that happiness was something other people experienced, that his past had disqualified him from normal human connections. Kate and her unshakable faith in redemption had taught him that the future didn't have to be limited by the mistakes of the past. They found Kate in her office, surrounded by wedding planners catering menus and fabric samples, looking simultaneously overwhelmed and delighted by the complexity of planning a celebration that would accommodate both intimate family moments and the public interest in what the media had dubbed the corporate fairy tale of the decade. Marcus, Kate said, rising from behind her desk with the grace that still made his heart skip beats. Please tell me you have strong opinions about centerpieces because I've been staring at these options for an hour and they all look the same to me. Marcus surveyed the array of floral arrangements spread across Kate's conference table, each one representing a different vision of what their wedding should look like. But his attention was drawn not to the flowers, but to the photograph that Kate kept on her desk, a candid shot of the three of them taken during a company picnic, laughing at something Lily had said, looking for all the world like a family that had always been together. I think, Marcus said carefully, that the flowers are the least important part of this whole thing. What matters is that we're promising to build a life together, to keep protecting each other and the people we care about, and to prove every day that love is stronger than fear. Kate smiled, the expression transforming her face from corporate executive to woman in love. That's exactly the right answer. Lily, who had been examining the various wedding cake samples with the serious attention of a professional food critic, looked up from her taste testing with a chocolate-smudged grin. I think the flowers should be pink, the cake should be chocolate, and the wedding should be perfect because you two are perfect together. Marcus knelt down to hug his daughter, marveling once again at her ability to cut through complexity and arrive at truth. You know what, Princess, I think you're absolutely right. As the wedding planning meeting continued around them, Marcus found his mind drifting to thoughts of the future they were building together. In 6 months, Kate would officially become Lily's stepmother, formalizing a relationship that had been developing naturally for over a year. In a year, they would break ground on the Novatech Children's Hospital, a facility dedicated to bringing cutting-edge medical treatment to young patients, regardless of their family's ability to pay. In 5 years, if current research trends continued, they would likely cure several forms of childhood cancer entirely. But beyond the professional achievements and public recognition, Marcus was most excited about the simple moments that would define their life together. Saturday mornings when Kate would read the newspaper aloud while he made breakfast and Lily practiced violin. Sunday afternoons when they would walk through the city parks, pointing out changes and improvements, watching their community grow and thrive. Quiet evenings when they would sit on their balcony, watching the sunset, paint the skyline in colors that reminded them of the morning when everything changed. Earth to Marcus. Kate's voice brought him back to the present, where wedding planners were waiting for his approval on seating arrangements that would accommodate both family intimacy and corporate protocol. Sorry, Marcus said with a sheepish grin. I was thinking about the future. Good thoughts, Kate asked, moving to stand beside him with the easy familiarity that had developed between them. The best, Marcus confirmed, slipping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. I was thinking about how lucky we are to have found each other and how excited I am to see what we build together. Lily looked up from her continued cake sampling with an expression of exaggerated patience. You two are being mushy again. Can we please finish planning this wedding so I can go tell Dr. Martinez about the new gene therapy results? Kate and Marcus laughed, the sound filling the office with warmth and joy. This was their life now, a perfect blend of professional achievement and personal happiness, of individual dreams and shared goals of love that had been forged in crisis and tempered by trust. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Kate's office, illuminating 3 people who had found their way to each other through courage, sacrifice, and the simple belief that everyone deserved protection from the world's cruelties, Marcus understood that they had achieved something more valuable than corporate success or personal safety. They had proven that heroes weren't born, they were made by the choices they made when it mattered most. They had shown that love could triumph over fear, that hope could overcome despair, and that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to accept that the world's darkness was stronger than their light. And as 9-year-old Lily Callahan, future scientist, current wedding planner, and eternal optimist, would later write in her school essay about heroes, sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone who needs help even when it's scary. That's what my dad taught me, and that's what Kate taught him. And that's what makes people into heroes. Not because they're not afraid, but because they help anyway. In the end, that was the truest measure of their victory. Not the defeat of Kyle Brennan, or the success of Novatech, or even the love they had found together, but the knowledge that they had created a future where children could grow up believing that heroes existed, that help would come when it was needed, and that the world was fundamentally a place where good people looked out for each other. The sun set on their story as it had risen with light, painting the sky in impossible colors, with hope stronger than fear, and with the absolute certainty that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to prove that love, courage, and human decency would always be more powerful than greed, violence, and despair. Some stories end with victory. Others end with love. The best stories end with the promise that both will continue, passed down from heroes to the children who will become heroes themselves until the world itself becomes a place worthy of their dreams.